So we're back again, Fairfax community, and we're back with another extraordinary person. He thinks we're just going to talk about one topic today, but we're going to talk about all sorts of things, which make the whole picture of him quite extraordinary and interesting. His name is Christian Buxton, and he's from a long lineage of very, very successful business people. But that's a small wedge for Christian because he does his own thing, including running his own consultancy, but he's also a filmmaker, which is what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about his latest short movie. Christian, thanks for joining the Fairfax.
Thanks, Ross, for having me.
Before we get into your amazing new short film, is it fair to say that you're from a pretty interesting family, Christian?
I suppose so, but I think, I think all families are interesting. Like my consulting business, I consult to family businesses, and I find all families endlessly interesting. And we all come from families. If we become parents ourselves, we create our own families. And yeah, I mean, the family construct in itself is something that sort of subtly evolves every generation, doesn't it? You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I suppose from the outside, I mean, yeah, I do come from, so my surname's Buxton. We're originally in Buxton real estate, and then my dad's brothers, he's one of 6 siblings, but his brothers were all property developers and still are, known as MAB. And yeah, they've all been, I mean, my dad's was in waste management recycling. I ran a waste management recycling business with him for over 20 years. But yeah, they're all incredibly driven, very entrepreneurial, very competitive. So yeah, I suppose, they've, from the outside looking in, I suppose they've been very successful. But there's been certain, I suppose, specific attributes that I think that have assisted them to be successful. But I don't find our family any more interesting than others, to be honest. I mean, I just find people interesting, in general. Yeah, I mean, obviously in the West and in the sort of, we tend to esteem and value people that have, competitive success in sport, or we might value someone or esteem someone who's successful in business. But I don't think that we should be valuing people's worth or what they contribute based on those metrics. I think, we can have a much broader metric, and I think that's up for the individual to find what that metric is. It's certainly not something that I engage in relationships with people based on their financial sort of success. You know what I mean? It's more about, for me, it's just the person they are and what other values do they have outside of, their work and their career. What other things are they interested in? Yeah, that's what sort of, I have I suppose a broader set of interests that I looked for in people, rather than just one thing. That I've certainly met people who've been very successful, very wealthy, that are great people, and that I connect with on a human level. And I've also met the opposite, people who are very successful and they're ruthless and cutthroat, and that's just the way they are in that game, and that's okay. But it just often means that you can't really have a relationship with them because they only think about themselves, So yeah.
Christian, how did you find your way into filmmaking?
Look, I always wanted to be. I always had, a desire. I mean, I always loved film growing up, and I grew up in the 80s, 70s and the 80s, and there was sort of those iconic sort of films, like Star Wars and Spielberg's films like E.T. and Close Encounters. And, film was like when you went to the cinema, which, like the next generation, our kids have got those different ways of accessing, media. So it's online, it could be on a phone, could be on the TV. But for us growing up in the 70s and 80s, you want to see a film before video came along, you went to the cinema. And it was a collective experience. You went into this room, this dark room with all these people, the lights went out, and there was sort of a silence before the film started. And then you were immersed in this film, and you went into it's sort of seemingly like we didn't have 3D films then, but it was like you entered the world, particularly like, when you got these fantasy films like Star Wars and that. So you entered the world. And so, yeah, for me, it was quite a magical experience going to the cinema and sort of escaping, normal suburban life. That was pretty exciting. So I always had that connection with cinema, and I had a desire to sort of pursue it. But, it's sort of, I suppose, coming from the family that I did, it was, there was a heavy emphasis on business and commerciality, and film in Australia was certainly the 80s and 90s wasn't a booming industry and never has been. So I went to uni, did a Bachelor of Commerce, and then worked in surfwear marketing for a couple of years before I decided, hey, look, I actually really want to give that film thing a crack, and then went back to study film and studied film, and then worked in film and TV. And but at a certain point, I suppose the romance of filmmaking versus the reality of which wasn't really filmmakers, really advertising, production, corporate videos, corporate comms, just started to grind me down, to be perfectly honest. And I chose a different pathway. So yeah, but that's sort of how I got into film. And then it's just sort of come back into my life. It just in the last sort of 10 years, I've just subjects that I've been passionate about, that I've engaged in. I just thought I'd like to make a film about that subject, So the first one I did when I came back into it was men's mental health, and I focused on someone I knew who'd had a struggle with their mental health journey, and that's really what reconnected me to film. And prior to that, with a group of other guys I knew had run, when we lost a friend of ours to suicide, we started a charity surf film festival. Sorry, a charity surf festival, and called the Bolt Blowers, where we raised money for mental health research. But it was also a bit about, a big part about having that conversation around men's mental health. And because of exposure to that, and continued exposure to that over the years, I just thought, oh yeah, it'd be good to make a little film about one of the guys that I knew who had a struggle, and just sort of normalize, what we frame as men's mental health.
Just to go back on what you said a bit earlier, Christian, that magic has gone, hasn't it, of going to a cinema? Everything's so readily available now. It was very special, wasn't it, sitting in an old movie cinema, as you
100%.
say?
Yeah, 100%. But I think, it's like a lot of things. I think it's sort of, yes, we've given lots of different options, and there's less, maybe films that get to cinemas and so forth. But it's sort of, we can still have that experience. We just got to choose that. You got to find the film and you got to choose it. And it's so I still, for me, I mean, I've got 4 kids, so I don't get to choose that experience very often. But when I do, 100%, it's still for me like it was when I was a kid. Like I can definitely, I'm a lot fussier with the films that I watch, but it's still the same. It's still just about sitting there and being immersed in the story and the reality that's presented to you.
Favorite cinema?
Favorite cinema? Yeah, well, there was I think the Belgrave cinema. There's a cinema up in Belgrave, and also they used to have at the Sun Cinema in Yarraville. Why I mention these two is because the Sun's recently changed, but up until like 10 years ago, both cinemas still had the feet warmers. So you could go in, take your shoes off, and put your feet in these feet warmers, and just really, take the comfort level to another level. Because I mean, you can go to gold class and everything, but it's sort of, to me, it's all a bit sterile gold class. You sort of put up, but something about putting your feet warmers in warmers that have had hundreds of other people's feet in them. I don't know what that is, but yeah, I don't know. There's something about it's like, when you're a kid, you have a hot water bottle, like there's something sort of comforting about it, something comforting about having your feet in these little warmers. It's like that added little thing that you kind of have that, I don't know. Yeah, it's somewhat nostalgic or something. Yeah.
Not nostalgic like going to a public toilet and sitting on a seat that's warm from the previous.
No, I don't have nostalgia for that. You may, and obviously it sounds like you do. Um, yeah, I don't have a lot of nostalgia for public toilets. I find them quite scary, actually. Um,
I'll steer away from that before we drift off track. Um,
yeah,
can you tell me about your latest short film? My name is Jack.
yeah. So my name is Jack is about, and I'll call him Jack, Dr. Jack, because he still likes to have an anonymity, although he was an anesthetist for many, many years.
Yeah.
Um, and secretly battled with his own addiction to alcohol and also, medications that are found in hospitals, so pretty heavy duty chemical medication. So, um, yeah, he was able to hide that very, very successfully for many, many years until, I suppose he reached a bit of a crisis point, a bit of a breakdown, and he had to stick his hand up and seek help. And he actually, he talks about in the film, he had something like 6 hospitalizations before he actually got um, a recovery that held. And then he went back to working as an anaesthetist, and then eventually, started to move into addiction medicine. So I suppose supporting the recovery of other addicts, and also supporting the recovery of other doctors. So I just found he had a really interesting view, both as an addict and also as a medical practitioner. And yeah, there was a few interesting things that came out of it for me. I suppose from that perspective was that he really, because there still is, like, even within the medical community, there's different views and ideas about addiction. And because it is stigmatized, people don't want to maybe sort of gravitate toward it. It's not seen as a money-making venture if you're wanting to be, if you're a doctor that's seeking to be a profitable doctor or to make more money. It's not necessarily a massive income earner. And if you're at a society cocktail party, talking about you're an addiction doctor is probably not as esteemed or as desirable as other forms of medicine. Um, but yeah, there's a couple of things that stood out for me. Was obviously that he said, look, there's actually, you'd be surprised how many doctors, medical practitioners, end up with addiction problem.
Is there one
And
underlying cause that recurs as to why that happens?
no, it's not. Look, his view is, I mean, you sort of like it's an interesting. I mean, why I'm interested in the subject is because my in my first marriage, my first wife, when she got postnatal depression with our second child, she ended up self-medicating with ice or methamphetamine, and I didn't know what that looked like from the outside. And the medical support we're having saying, well, this is consistent with postnatal psychosis. So it sort of was. That's what I thought we were dealing with initially. But so that's my sort of, I suppose, qualification or exposure to addiction first up. And yeah, obviously she couldn't get recovery and the marriage ended and I had to get custody of my kids, which I did. But uh, what I found really curious is that, about addiction and how we view it in society. It was obviously, I was married to Sharon for over 12 years, person I loved and respected. And I saw her totally turn into this other human being when she was in addiction. Like, just it was like, night and day. And so, I didn't have that sort of view that addicts are demons and evil people and stuff like that. I could see this was a person who was, in her instance, was mentally unwell, had self-medicated, and then it created another health problem on top of that, which was an addiction. But I experienced, going through rehabs and trying to get medical support and social support, and that there was a lot of even within the medical community, a lot of stigma and judgment around addicts. And I was like, these people are just human beings with a health problem, and that we shame, we blame them, we all and that approach does not help them, you know. It's sort of like, you know, dealing with a kid who's neurodivergent, might have high level ADHD, like, you know, sort of judging them, shaming and blaming them, and, you know, trying to force them into a box doesn't help them. It's the same, you know, with addicts. So yeah, because of that exposure, you know, I just, yeah, when I suppose I've been interested in being part of the dialogue that sort of challenges those inherited prejudices and, you know, stigmatized views of addicts. And that's how I sort of ended up, you know, with Jack. And but sorry to sort of be circling around, but one of the interesting things talking with Jack was that yeah, that there is quite a number of medical practitioners that end up becoming addicted. But the Medical Association of Doctors has their own recovery program, and they have an incredibly high success rate. So their success rate or recovery rate, long-term recovery rate, is 70%.
Which is 7 times what the normal one is, isn't it?
Yeah, so the normal recovery rate at the moment, sort of as a global average, based on the resources that are available for addiction, is 10%.
Mm.
So, and I always remember when I found that out, when we went to rehab for Sharon, and I was kind of like, oh my God, I had no idea, because again, it's not published or publicized broadly. I was like, why is it 10%? That just seems so weird. Or why is it?
Mm.
And then to hear that the Doctors Association were getting a far higher recovery rate was really interesting. And also, there's the Pilots Association also has their own recovery program for pilots, and they have a very high recovery rate. And so it's sort of, you know, and we went into some of the detail around that, but to sort of simplify it, it was sort of saying that, you know, if we have these programs that are resourced and aren't just resourced for 1 month or 3 months, and there's an ongoing sort of support program for 2 to 3 years, we have a very high success rate of long-term recovery. Whereas at the moment, you know, someone might go to recovery for a month, you know, 2 months or 3 months, and then that's kind of it. I mean, they can obviously join a 12-step program, which is great, like NA, for example, or AA. But, you know, sometimes they need other things to hold them accountable, and, you know, other supports other than just, you know, the 12-step programs as well. So, you know, when we had the screening of the film at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival, at the end of it, we had a panel, and we had Dr. Jacker from Monash Health, and he's a specialist in addiction medicine. And he's not an addict himself, but he's been a long-term medical practitioner. But when he said what attracted him to addiction, what he finds so exciting about it, if that's the right word, but that's the word he sort of used, was that he said, there's so much upside with addiction. He said, we throw so much money at other illnesses that are either terminal or can't be healed, and probably will never be sort of, you know, there'll never be a solution to. Yet, you know, relative to the funding that goes to those illnesses, the funding that goes to addiction is so small. And if we just threw a little bit more, we might bridge this gap between, you know, a well-resourced program like the Doctors Association, which is 70%, and the average at the moment with what resource available is about 10%. So, yeah, I think, you know, and what would change? What do we need to change for that to happen? Then obviously we need to change our view of addiction, and that's about dealing with, you know, the ignorance around addiction, the myths about addiction, the stigma around addiction, the prejudice around addiction. Because then, you know, it's like in recent times we had there was going to be another safe injecting room in Melbourne CBD, and you know, the Premier knocked it back. And we, you know, I know you being a medico, you know how many people OD. There's thousands of people that OD in Australia every year, and I think since the safe injecting rooms have opened in Australia, I think King's Cross might have been the first one, we've had hundreds of thousands of lives saved. by having these safe injecting rooms. And, you know, some of those people that are in those safe injecting rooms also eventually get well as well. They might end up in a recovery process as well. And not that there's any, I mean, if someone continues their addiction, I don't have a judgment about that. But obviously, you know, we know that when people are addicted to any sort of substance, they're not functioning at their best or their optimum. So, you know, you want to sort of provide the choice and the support to someone to get well. But if they don't, they don't. You know, I'm not going to prejudice or judge someone. That's where they're at, you know. But, you know, just I think, you know, if we can collectively change our view and better resource the support for addicts, it'd be a game changer. Because what, you know, the other thing is well, you know, an active addict, I know from being a lived experience from a family member, you know, it has a significant impact on your mental health. It's had an impact on my kids', you know, mental health. So, and that's not to blame or shame the addict for that, but just if they could get well, then we'd have less of that impact on the families as well. So that's another aspect. And then, you know, then there's just I suppose, you know, what's the cost on the community if those people, you know, are unwell, get incarcerated, you know. A lot of the people that are in jail at the moment are in there because of drug offences, you know, or drug-related offences.
There was an interesting podcast that John Sylvester, the crime reporter, did, and he interviewed Cliff Lockwood, who was one of the police officers who was involved in one of the police shootings around the time of the Wall Street police killings in the 80s. Anyway, his life went off track and he ended up in a prison in Darwin. And he said exactly the same thing. He said there are so many people incarcerated, not because they're nasty people, but because they've just fallen the wrong side of drugs and have not had the help that they require. And he actually found it quite an enlightening experience. Christian, how did your subject of your latest documentary, how did he hide it at work, his addiction?
That's a good question. Look, we didn't we didn't really, I suppose, go into the detail of that. I think he talked about, you know, I think the doses he was having while he was high functioning. So you have high functioning addicts, alcoholics. So that's how he described himself. And he was sort of, I understand, you know, he was you know, when he was medicating at work, it was a certain dose to be high functioning. And then, you know, when you finish work, you can dose up, you know, dose up. Yeah, just like, you know, somewhat like an everyday person, you know, might go to work and they're not drinking alcohol. They go home and then they might have, you know, 3 or 4 drinks when they get home.
Yeah.
And, you know, their sort of cognitive ability and physical ability will be somewhat impaired by that. But it's okay in the confines of the home and what's required of them.
Did you find making this documentary confronting and or therapeutic, considering what you'd been through yourself?
I didn't find it confronting. I think when what was confronting was when my wife was deep in her addiction, dealing with that, seeing that was and accepting that was a reality. Jesus, this is like what the like. You know, it's one thing, you know, we've all sort of, you know, I'd seen or known people I grew up with who became addicts, but it was sort of out of sight, out of mind, or you see people on the streets. It's just kind of, there's no relationship to them. So it's very sort of, you're very detached, but to see it up front, yeah, hell yeah, it's confronting. It's like someone's, you know, you can sort of see why in other times, you know, religions would sort of, oh, you know, it's evil. They've been taken over by a demon or possessed, because it sort of has that kind, like from when you like we're talking about movies earlier, like it has that kind of thing. It's like this person is possessed. The only time I've seen anything similar was my best friend in high school. After we left high school, he was we didn't know, but when he was 19, he became very unwell. He was schizophrenic, and eventually was diagnosed as schizophrenic. But it was very similar when he got into psychosis. Very similar, you know. It was like this person was psychotic. You know, they're unstoppable in the pursuit of the drug and that lifestyle. You and I remember she was in rehab and doing really, really well. I think she'd been in there for like 3 months, and I just needed a break with the kids. So we went up to Cabarita on the northern New South Wales, and I had my parents helping me as well. And we're up there, and I got this phone call from the rehab, and they said, "Oh, look, really sorry to disturb you, but it's about Sharon." I said, "What is it?" And they said, "Oh, look, she's relapsed." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I knew that relapsing is part of the recovery process, but a lot of these recovery rehabs have pretty strict protocols while you're there. So it's 3 strikes and you're out. And so she'd done really well up until like the last sort of, it was like she was going to be out. We were going to come home. She's going to come out. And this was like 2 days before she's about to come out. And they said, look, she's relapsed twice, because they do daily drug tests. And I was like, oh my God, it was, what the hell? And then, the next day they rang, and it's like, oh, she's, because when you're under all that sort of stress, one of the things that keeps you going is hope, hope that they'll recover, hope that things will change. And I was in my own support program as well that really helped a lot, which is called Al-Anon, which is usually family support for alcoholics or family of alcoholics, but they also cater for families of addicts. And I found them really, and one of the things in there is just talking about hope, having faith in the process, and them getting recovery. But, and so I really kind of blindly, I hadn't had an experience. So I went, just gave hope that this was going to work and all be great. And then, just that the next day to get the call that, no, she's been kicked out. It was just like, because I'd seen her go from being fully possessed, like she was possessed, like in one of those sort of 80s horror movies, like The Exorcist or something, like fully possessed. And then sort of fully recovered and like, just really clear, open-hearted, lucid again, and like, very, very present, almost luminant, because it's sort of so much things get stripped back. It's a transformative process in itself. So it's kind of awe-inspiring, in a way. You're just like, wow, this is like a real spiritual, physical transformation that this person's going through. And so you sort of see that, and you're like, wow. And then so your hope really blossoms or expands. And then to get that phone call was just like, it's just like this absolute kick in the guts. It was just like far out. And then we came back, and we got her into the Melbourne private, and then she took herself out there the first night, and then came home. Then we're in another day rehab program, and then a week after that, she relapsed again. And it was just, I thought the writing's on the wall. This isn't gonna. I have to put myself and my kids first, and I don't feel safe for them or myself with her being in this active addiction. And so then I had to begin the process with the family courts and that whole thing. So it was definitely, it was definitely, a really challenging experience to go through, and I think there was definitely a physical, mental and physical cost at the end of it. And not straight away, but like I know once, because the whole family court process took, 18 months, and I had to cohabitate with her until the family courts would made a decision on who would have custody, and then the settlement, all that sort of thing. So it was probably, a year after that had all taken place, and I'd been out of living in the same house there for a year. I got Graves' disease, which is an autoimmune disorder. And it's your whole nervous system, which I'd had before, like 10 years ago before. And so they wanted to actually take out my thyroid because of that. And I did some research, and I wasn't really keen on going through with it, because what they do is they take your thyroid out, and then you get a replacement medication called thyroxine, I think it's called. But your body, the amount of medication you need changes as you evolve over time. And so you go through some real rough patches. So I was like, oh, I want to look at something different. And the psychologist I was seeing who was supporting me at the time was also had been a GP, and he suggested that we treat the symptoms, which is kind of all these physical stress symptoms. I couldn't sleep, I had a lot of adrenaline, just cortisol running peak 10. So I went on an antidepressant called Lexapro. And yeah, I was on that Friday, and that was fantastic help. You know, it was great help. But yeah, there was definitely going through that was that experience. You know, there was a cost on my mental health and my physical health. You know, that I had to eventually take care of. But it's funny how the body works. It could hold up until it knew it was safe to sort of let go. You know, once I'd moved out of there, had a new house, you know, a new safe place, and all the legal boundaries and requirements had been set up so that I could keep myself and my kids safe. And then it was like, okay, now I can, look after my own body, because here I am looking after my kids and my primary focus and getting through the situation. So, yeah, definitely had an impact for sure, for sure.
Our body is supposed to be in rest and digest the majority of the time and not fight or flight. And what you've just described, having your body in that constant state of vigilance, it's certainly no surprise that, as you say, when you were able to shut down, just the release of all these different chemicals and how your body then needed to recover and became unwell. Was it, you did what you had to do, but is it hard to let someone, a loved one, release them from your life, knowing that they're unwell, but you're doing it to protect yourself and your children?
Uh, Look, I mean, I suppose what I would say is that it's kind of like it was a very gradual sort of process, because there's like the first year when she had was just postnatal before I found out the addiction. She was just very sort of withdrawn and detached. So she sort of really moved away from me. So I had to sort of accept that.
Yeah.
So there's a level of acceptance of sort of change in the relationship and the dynamic. And then when we're dealing with the addiction, in Al-Anon, they talk about having a loving detachment. So it's not like you don't, you definitely go through, when you're dealing with someone who's crazy and can be aggressive and all those sorts of things. You can be, initially, you're probably detached with a lot of resentment, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. But, you kind of, Al-Anon sort of teaches you that, well, the way it's framed is it's a disease. They call it the disease, which you're powerless over. And that's one of the things that I didn't realize that I thought prior to going this, I thought I could have influence over someone. I mean, it wasn't a conscious thing. You just naturally think, I can help them, I can support them, I can control what they're doing. But you can't. Like, it's totally, their recovery is totally independent of you. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's no matter what you do willfully, unless they are at the point where they're ready for recovery, nothing you do is going to change that. You could even, do a forced intervention. You maybe get them into rehab for a period of time, but if they're genuinely not ready, eventually the addiction will come back.
Would you on that, would you agree with the statement? I think Rob Lowe, who suffered alcoholism for years and years, said you can't change for anyone but yourself. Would you say that's true?
Yes, I would say that's true. But also what I would say is that I know that for some addicts, having a family or having loved ones that they care about was sometimes a motivator, rather than having no one or anything. So, but I think it's a case by case thing. But essentially, yeah, they have to sort of choose that recovery. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
How has your subject of your latest documentary managed to stay on track for such a long period of time?
Look, he he with the doctor's recovery program, and to I think it's I don't know the technical or legalities around it, but I think to continue to be a licensed, particularly an anesthetist practitioner, they have to do pretty stringent drug tests to ensure that they are clean.
Mm.
So part of it is was that very stringent drug testing for quite a long period of time, so that he could continue to practice as a practitioner. NA on 12-step program has been an integral part of his recovery. So I think, I think it's like, I think it's for like a lot of people who are recovering from some sort of trauma or something like that, that I think that part of, and it's like a natural, like these are like natural practices that humans have had forever and a day. So but I think one of those things would be having a community. It's like, when you had guys that came back from the war and stuff, like having vet programs and those sort of things. It's like, we understand as perhaps few others can. You understand, the experience from the inside out. So I think having a community of people who understand that struggle is really helpful. And then I think the other part of it, I know for myself too, being in a 12-step program for families is that, giving service is really powerful part of keeping yourself sort of well as well. So, giving service to NA itself, like he gives a lot of service to NA. So they run conferences, lots of different the meetings themselves. There's lots of things that the literature that they distribute. There's quite a bit involved in supporting and administering these free community programs for people to go. And then for him also, being involved in addiction medicine and working in rehab, and I suppose, again, seeing it in his face, but seeing it with a different lens, I think's really helped him.
Mm.
Yeah, I think they're some of the key things. And he talked about too, and he also had, psychological support as well all along the way. So I think, he obviously had the doctor's program, the professional support they had by psychiatrists and psychologists, the routine drug testing to keep him accountable, and if something was to slip, that there were knowing that would be help and support for him, I think was really, really important as well. It's not there to sort of, as he's framed it, it's not there to kind of, catch him out or, shame and blame him once he's caught out. It's just there to ensure that he's well. And if he becomes unwell, we put you back in the program and give you some better support. And then I think it's about, connecting to a community that understands the problem that you face, and also giving service back to the community, in his case, around addiction medicine and addiction recovery.
Christian King, for a day, 3 things that you think need far more emphasis on for people with addictions.
I think, well, first thing would be understanding the problem, broadly. So this isn't a choice. This isn't a moral choice. It isn't a moral or ethical problem. It's a health problem. What's the best? The second thing would be, if someone has an addiction, what's the best way to help them? So, you might think you're helping them by running around and trying to do everything for them and get them into a rehab, but it's actually about giving them love and respect where they are today. So they're active in addiction, but they're still a human being. We still can give them love and respect, but it doesn't mean that we're going to enable them and give them money to go off and buy drugs or let them steal things from us. We can still have firm boundaries about where we begin and where we end, but we still give them love and respect. And then I think the third thing is, which would, really spills on the back of those first two, which is really about changing our view and understanding of addiction, is lobbying for better funding for addiction recovery and support, so that if addicts have got better resources and they're not they're not shamed for coming out, they can just say, someone's like, so if someone has cancer, you don't go, oh geez, he's got cancer, what an asshole, or what a what a,
Mm.
he's a what a low life. He's got cancer.
Mm.
We say he's got cancer, and we
Yeah.
go and we send him on to to Peter Mac, and we provide other facilities for them to get support. If we can change the social framing of addiction and how we understand it and how we value or disvalue people with addiction, then I think we can get the right support that addicts need. And maybe this recovery rate of 10% can go to 15, 20%, 25%. It's really sky's the limit ultimately. We can just sort of see. I mean, it's going to be one of the things over time, but certainly I think we haven't reached the ceiling because we haven't tested giving it better support.
Where next for your great documentary? It was very well received. Where next?
It's a good question. I send it off to festivals and just see what happens. I mean, that Melbourne Documentary Film Festival was the first festival that picked it up. It's interesting because I've made a few other, docos which have been picked up pretty easily and pretty quickly by festivals, but it was quite evident that addiction is not a sort of a popular subject or a subject
Okay.
I think is going to fill suits. Even Melbourne Documentary Film Festival, after contacting us and saying they wanted to run a screening that was dedicated to addiction, which included my film, another short film, and then a feature-length film on addiction. A week later, decided maybe we should pull the pin on it and make it online because we don't think we're going to sell any seats. But I sort of took that feedback in a constructive way and sent out, the information to my network, and we sold the cinema was sold out, which was a better ticket selling result than some of the other sessions that they had. But I'm just saying that the perception often is that we're not going to sell tickets because it's not a subject people want to sort of go and see. It's an ugly, dirty subject, and let's keep it out of sight, out of mind.
Any plans in the pipeline for perhaps a hang gliding safety documentary?
So Ross is referring to a short story I shared with him about a guy I met who had an artificial limb and had inherited a hang glider when he swapped a drill with one of his neighbours who had an old hang glider from the 80s and taught himself to hang glide out the back of Cairns. So no, look, I don't. If I could track that guy down, I think he would be a fantastic subject.
Or the guy at London Bridge you made reference to?
Oh, that one. Oh, that's another story. Yeah, but that involves taking some illicit substances in my youth, so I won't go into that. But I don't. I always just sort of keep my mind open to sort of see what's next. But it's generally, it'll be something about, it's always about the human endeavor and about change within that human being. That's what I find really interesting. And I think, all those great, films that got the hero's journey, which is sort of the crux of all those great films like Wizard of Oz, Star Wars is a classic example of it. But, these people go on a quest. And at the beginning of the story, there's a problem, there's a challenge, and they're one way. And at the end of it, the problem's solved, and they're different. They're a different person, And often it's, like a coming of age story is where the young guy becomes a man and sort of the learnings that he has. And I don't know, I just always find that fascinating about human nature, and obviously, mental health for some people can be a really transforming journey. It can really, it doesn't have to be this burdensome thing. It's just a process, a journey that someone goes through. Same with drug addiction, and that's a radical one. Their lives can radically change. And when you meet recovered addicts, they've often had a really, interesting lives, really interesting people, and have had, gone from incredible lows to incredible highs to sort of, a more measured path. So yeah, I just find human beings endlessly interesting, So yeah, who knows what the next one will be? Could be about you, Ross.
Favorite Australian movie, Christian?
Mad Max.
Mad Max, which one? First one?
Number one, yeah, yeah, yeah. I would say Mad Max. I mean, there's lots. I mean, there's The Party, Puberty Blues. Um, yeah, there's heaps of Australian movies that I've loved. Even
Lantana?
but even the schlock ones like Stone, Turkey Shoot. These are all like 80s schlock sort of films.
Mm.
Razorback. Yeah. I mean, I would love to see more iconic Australian films made. There was when in the 80s there was a tax incentive that I think if you invested in a film, you got 150% write-off. So if you invested $100, you got a tax credit of $150. So that's sort of what the incentive was. It'd be great to see something like that again, because then I think we just see a lot more
Mm.
stories made. And I think, where our culture's sort of a melting pot of, European and American culture on its face value, and, an Asian culture as well. But, you know, when you're Australian, you know the sort of nuances of our culture as opposed to being an American, as opposed to being a Canadian, and while we speak the same language and we're exposed to some of the similar popular culture, we're still different. We've got footy here, meat pies, moccasins. Yeah, there's lots of stuff about Australia that if you live in the country, is iconic and unique to itself.
Christian, how can people find out more about you and your documentaries?
That's a good question. Just search out Christian Buxton on Vimeo, and you'll see some of my films on there. So just look on Vimeo and search me up.
All right, we'll put some stuff in the show notes as well. Christian, thanks for joining us today. You really are a very interesting person, and you do travel in lots of different directions. We really appreciate your honesty, um, and the story that you told today, not only about your own personal journey, but about your documentary. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Ross. I really appreciate it. And on that note, it's funny because I gave my son a lift back to school from a specialist appointment, and he was talking about the Renaissance, and I said, "Oh yeah, I'm probably a Renaissance man." And he's like, "Oh, you're not a Renaissance man," because he has a particular view of what a Renaissance man. But I at the lights, I searched it up, and the modern definition is a man that has proficient knowledge in more than one area. And I certainly have, proficient knowledge in more than one area. But he was adamant that I was not a Renaissance man.
Christian
And then,
Buxton, Renaissance
yeah,
man.
that's it, my friend. That's it.
Thank you, Christian.
All right, Ross. Have a great day. Thanks, mate.